Welcome to Corporate Finance Explained, where we break down the essential topics every corporate finance professional needs to know. This series is narrated by AI, created using CFI's expert training materials, and designed to help you stay ahead in the world of finance. Enjoy this week's deep dive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are exploring, let's call it the invisible factor that really dictates success or failure in a modern corporation. We're talking about corporate culture. And look, I know what you might be thinking. Culture. But this isn't something that shows up on a balance sheet, yet it ends up impacting your cash flow, your NPV calculations, your entire enterprise value, really, more than you might think. So our mission today is to dive into the sources that treat culture not as some, soft HR topic, but as a hard financial driver.
It really is. I mean, what's fascinating here is recognizing its sheer power. When we say corporate culture, we mean the shared set of values, behaviors, the norms that dictate how work gets done. The core idea we're working from is this. A strong culture is like a precision tool. It enforces financial discipline. It accelerates innovation.
And a toxic one.
A toxic culture is a financial liability, full stop. It will inevitably destroy value, even if the business model on paper looks completely solid.
It's either the ultimate performance multiplier or the ultimate impediment.
Okay, so we're going to cover the four major financial levers that culture pulls, the hard numbers side of this, and then get into how finance teams can actually measure and, maybe more importantly, influence it. Let's jump straight into those fundamentals then. When we say culture affects the financials, what does that actually mean? What are the specific channels that translate, say, trust into actual dollars and cents?
It really boils down to four direct channels. The first is probably the most tangible one. It's productivity and execution.
Okay.
In high-trust cultures, psychologically safe ones, teams just move with incredible speed. They don't waste time documenting every little step because they're afraid of being blamed. They don't wait for 3 levels of sign-off. And think about the quantifiable impact of that. I mean, one source we looked at estimates that high-trust cultures can cut decision cycle times by up to 40%.
40%, that's huge. It's massive. They escalate problems immediately to the right person instead of letting them fester. And that acceleration, it drastically improves time to market for new products. It increases throughput. It's real.
And that speed, that fast movement, it seems inherently linked to the second lever you mentioned, which is decision-making quality.
Exactly.
I've seen cultures where the only feedback you ever get is positive because, nobody wants to be the person who says, this is a bad idea.
Precisely. That feels good, but it's terrible for business.
Yeah.
A healthy culture encourages robust, transparent debate. When people feel safe to voice concerns, especially on big things like due diligence or a huge capital expenditure.
Leadership gets fewer blind spots.
Leadership gets fewer blind spots, the cost of one bad decision, a failed merger, a flawed product launch that can wipe out an entire year of profits. So good culture acts as a massive hedge against those kinds of catastrophic errors.
And then there's the one that's maybe more visible, the cost of human capital. The third lever is employee retention.
Absolutely. Turnover is this enormous recurring expense. And we're not just talking about the direct cost of hiring, which can be, 50 to 150% of an employee's salary.
It's way more than that.
It's so much more. You're talking about lost institutional knowledge, the productivity dip during training, the disruption from constant churn in key teams like sales or engineering. A strong culture lowers that churn, which flows directly to your operating margins.
Okay. And the fourth lever, which I think is critical for anyone interested in financial risk, is risk management and compliance.
This one has a direct link to your cost of capital. Toxic, fear-based cultures, they suppress bad news. Teams will hide financial misstatements or operational defects or compliance issues until they blow up.
Until it's a full-blown crisis.
Right. And when a company is seen as high risk because of, say, a history of regulatory fines, which is a cultural failure, lenders and investors demand a higher return, your cost of capital goes up. The interest rate you pay literally goes up because your culture is broken.
So, if culture is pulling these four levers, let's connect this to the bigger picture. Financial planning, corporate strategy. How does a company with a good culture actually execute a better financial strategy?
We see it in 4 key areas. First, forecast accuracy. It's just better.
Yeah.
In a transparent culture where surfacing a risk is rewarded, not punished, finance teams get cleaner, earlier data.
So fewer surprises at the end of the quarter.
Far fewer surprises. You're not guessing. You're being informed proactively by the business. Second is cost discipline. A culture of high accountability means teams just manage spending more responsibly. They know they'll be held accountable for variances.
But they're not just padding the budget.
Exactly. They challenge last year's assumptions. Financially mature cultures can even drive things like zero-based budgeting, which is a massive cultural shift away from, entitlement spending.
And then the flip side of that, the positive side, is innovation and revenue growth. Everyone says they want innovation, but very few cultures are actually built for it.
It's true. Real innovation requires rapid failure, learning, and that only happens with psychological safety. If your employees think that failing on a pilot project is going to damage their career, they'll only ever pursue safe, incremental ideas.
Nothing disruptive.
Nothing disruptive. But cultures that foster collaboration see faster R&D cycles, they kill bad projects faster, and that directly impacts top-line revenue growth. And finally, you see the difference in crisis performance.
How a company weathers a storm.
Right. Strong cultures are resilient. When a market shock hits a pandemic, a supply chain collapse, these companies adapt. They don't freeze up. The trust that's already there enables rapid, smart cost-cutting and resource reallocation. They just move faster than their low-trust competitors.
Okay, I want to pause on something before we get to the case studies, because it's a really interesting point. If culture is so clearly tied to performance, why do we see some companies, let's use Tesla as the classic example, which are known for a high-pressure, high-turnover environment? Why do they still outperform? Isn't it just about product and vision sometimes?
That is a critical point. We have to be nuanced here. Not all strong cultures look the same. Tesla's culture, for instance, is built for hyperspeed and ruthless execution. It's intensely mission-driven.
Right.
And it sacrifices long-term employee retention for short-term velocity. In that specific context, a high-growth, disruptive company, that culture delivers results for a time. It optimizes for speed above all else.
But it's not sustainable.
Well, the sources suggest there's a trade-off. It often leads to burnout and bottlenecks as the company scales. It's effective for one strategic moment, but maybe not for stable long-term value creation, where trust and psychological safety become essential for complex global operations.
That's a great distinction. And it's a perfect context for our real-world examples. Let's start with the Triumphs companies, where culture was their ultimate advantage.
Let's look at Netflix. Their famous freedom and responsibility culture, that was the foundation for their strategic agility. They have the keeper test. If your manager wouldn't fight to keep you, you get a generous severance.
Brutal honesty.
Brutal honesty, but also high performance. It meant that when they needed to pivot from DVDs to streaming and then to global content production, they had an adaptable workforce ready to go. No bureaucratic silos. Their culture is what enabled those massive capital deployment decisions.
And that transparency, that's also a hallmark of Google, right?
Absolutely. Google's commitment to psychological safety, this idea that you can bring an incomplete idea or a concern forward without fear, that's what powers their R&D engine. They reward experimentation and data-driven debate.
So it's safe to fail.
It's safe to try things and have them not work. And that environment lets them prune their project portfolio ruthlessly. They kill failing ventures quickly instead of sinking more money into them. That is a massive, measurable financial benefit that comes directly from their culture.
Okay, now for the cautionary tales. The cultures that actively shredded shareholder value, WeWork immediately comes to mind. A colossal failure, driven almost entirely by its unchecked culture. It was the absolute epitome of growth at all costs.
It was. The culture of exuberance and unchecked founder authority meant that traditional financial controls were just ignored. Expense management was non-existent, and the valuation models were based on assumptions that no skeptical finance team was allowed to challenge.
And that led directly to the failed IPO.
Directly. It erased tens of billions in paper value because the internal discipline was never there to support the external story. And then, of course, you have the definitive case study in cultural toxicity, Theranos.
That was an environment defined by secrecy and paranoia, the suppression of any and all dissent.
Exactly. I mean, employees were siloed, information was guarded, the whole system was built to protect the lie, not the business.
And when you have a culture that punishes whistleblowers or even just basic questions,
the compliance function is neutered. The result wasn't just an ethical failure. It was massive financial misstatements, catastrophic compliance failures, shareholder lawsuits. The financial wreckage there proves that culture is internal control. When it fails, the company can be completely obliterated.
This brings us to the most practical part of our deep dive. If culture is this critical, how do we move beyond just describing it and start managing it? You said earlier that finance teams can and should analyze it like any other operational driver.
We need to give finance professionals the tools. It's about integrating cultural health into their dashboards using data they often already have.
Okay, let's detail some of those measurable indicators. First, you mentioned employee turnover and retention metrics. Right, but finance needs to look deeper than the aggregate number. You have to track turnover by team and by function. High turnover in, say, internal audit or compliance, that is a massive cultural red flag. It signals those teams might not feel safe to do their jobs.
Then you have engagement survey data. While it's qualitative, finance should be pressure testing the correlations. If a department scores poorly on trust and leadership, does that same department also have higher cost overruns? You have to link the sentiment to the operational failure. Next is forecasting behavior, a simple but really powerful one. Are teams constantly padding their forecast to create easy beats? Or are they presenting realistic, aggressive, but achievable plans and surfacing risks early? Padding budgets is a cultural symptom of low trust.
The fourth one is project delivery metrics. You could look at consistent delays or cost overruns. If projects are always missing milestones, not because of funding, but because of cross-functional handoff failures, that's a collaboration problem. That's a culture problem.
And finally, the most serious warning sign, ethical and compliance indicators, spikes in internal audit findings, regulatory violations, or a sudden increase in whistleblower reports. These are non-negotiable red flags. They are leading indicators of catastrophic financial risk.
Okay, so we have the metrics. How does the finance function, which is often seen as the internal police, how does it pivot to being a cultural architect? How do you use the budget to actually improve the culture?
It starts with how finance itself operates. First, reinforce accountability. Not through blame, but through clarity. Make sure every budget has clear ownership. When assumptions change, the owner updates the forecast. That drives transparency. Second, improve the communication cadence. Run business reviews that are for collaborative problem solving, not punitive cross-examinations. You have to encourage risk sharing by explicitly asking, what are you seeing that might derail this forecast?
And crucially, align incentives with behaviors. Compensation structures are probably the most powerful cultural tool there is. You have to design them to promote long-term thinking and collaboration. If you only reward short-term revenue, you will get toxic short-term behavior.
Finance leaders also have to champion psychological safety within their own teams. FP&A and internal audit must feel completely safe to challenge assumptions and escalate issues without fearing for their careers. If your finance function lacks safety, the whole company is at risk.
And the final piece is just modeling it. Finance leaders have to model the right behaviors. They have to be the stewards of cultural norms through their own clarity, fairness, and transparency. They signal what matters most. So the strategic takeaway for you here is this. Corporate culture is not some intangible concept. It affects every single financial metric you track: productivity, risk, innovation. It is a strategic, quantifiable asset.
The analysis is conclusive. Companies that intentionally invest in and foster strong, healthy cultures consistently reduce their costs, increase their strategic agility, and they outperform their peers over the long run. The numbers prove it.
So if strong cultures are built intentionally architected, not accidental, how should you, in your role, redesign your next budget review, your next incentive plan, to ensure you're building long-term health and not just optimizing for short-term gains? That's your deep dive takeaway for today.
Thanks for listening to Corporate Finance Explained. If you found this episode valuable, be sure to check out more episodes and explore CFI's highly rated courses at corporatefinanceinstitute.com. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into essential finance topics. See you next time.